Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and I'm wondering if you've ever had that very frustrating experience that many people tell me about. You've had this great musical idea, it's sort of come to you in a flash, or sometimes it's been developing in your head for a while. But actually, how do I write this thing down? Sometimes you can kind of think, well, at least if I can get to an instrument, maybe I can play around with it, find the notes, at least get a handle on that. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. But it's great if you can hear something in your head and just think, great, I can write that down. So if it's a melody, well, maybe that's something you can cope with because it's just one single line. But what about if you're hearing something in two parts, say? Could be more than two parts, but let's limit this particular exercise to two parts. So you're maybe hearing a kind of melody, we're hearing a kind of bass line. Well, how do those two things fit together? What are the notes in the top part? What are the notes in the bass line? Can I begin to sketch those down? So here's a little exercise in seeing if we can do that. So hearing two parts, and I'm just going to invite you to join me in having a go at this. Don't have to if you don't want to, obviously. But what if you want to do, if you want to try doing this, is just to copy down what you can see in front of you. So if you've got some music paper, some manuscript paper, that's great. If you haven't, doesn't matter. Any old piece of paper or the back of something that you're not using, put 5 lines on a stave for the treble clef, 5 lines on a stave for the bass clef, because what we're going to do is listen to an upper part in the treble clef and a lower part in the bass clef. It's going to be in the key of A minor, which has no sharps and no flats. That's why there's nothing in the key signature. It's going to be in 3/4 times. So there are 3 crotchet notes, 2 crotchet beats to a bar, or 3 quarter note beats to a bar, to a measure. And it's going to have 4 bars in total, 4 measures in its total length. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, let me suggest that if you've written that down, that's a great start. Let me suggest that you start by listening to the upper part. If you try to take both parts in at once, you just end up going all over the place and getting nowhere. Unless you've done this sort of thing before and you're quite skilled at it. But just start with the upper part and think, okay, I've given you the first note as an A. So what happens after the first note? I'm going to play it soon. And then you can think, well, is it going up? Is it going down? Or is it repeating? Those are your only options. Okay, so up, down, or repeating. If it's going up or down, is it going up or down by step, or is it leaping? Because if it's going by step, well, that's fine. If the first note's A and maybe it goes down by step, well, the second note must be G. You might then think, is it G natural? Is it G sharp? That's got to be decided. Don't worry too much about that. You can always come back and refine it later. What happens next? Does it make another step in the same direction? Does it take a step in the opposite direction? So you're really thinking about kind of how many repetitions you hear, how many stepwise movements do you hear? And then if you hear anything that's a little bit bigger than a stepwise movement, well, okay, obviously a leap. Is it a small leap? Is it a big leap? So you can start by thinking in those sort of global terms, get the general shape of the melody, and then see if you can kind of fine tune the details. So you've got 4 bars, 4 measures. I'll count in the first bar, the first measure, so you can kind of get the beats in your head. We've got the first note A, and here's A in the bass part as well. Okay, we know the note and the length of the first note. Have a listen to this first playing and see if you can get that shape of repetition, step, leaps. See if you can get any of those notes together and see how you get on writing the upper part, the melody line of this. After the first playing, you might want to pause the video for as long as you want to, because then you can kind of think about it. What did I remember? If you can remember things, that's really useful, because then you can replay them between the official playings. See what happens. Okay, so without further ado, here's a chord of A minor. Here's the first note A and the first note in the bass. 1, 2, 3. Pause if you want to think about that. Okay, let's just have another playing. Now we've kind of got over the shock of hearing that. Let's see if we can put any kind of meat on the bones, as it were, of that. If we've got some idea of what that shape was, can we now get a bit more detail? Here's the first note, A, and A in the bass, and A minor chord. 1, 2, 3. Pause if you want to think about it. Okay, now I wonder if you kind of got the shape of that melody in your mind. I mean, from the first note, it seemed to be climbing by step, didn't it? And then sort of stepping back. So climbing for a couple of notes, stepping back. Then wasn't the third bar, the third measure, the same shape? You know, it was climbing by step and then stepping back in the other direction before slightly leaping to the last note. But when you heard that same shape in the third measure, the third bar that you heard in the first bar, the first measure, they weren't exactly the same notes, were they? So same shape, but different notes. So hearing this stepping up and then coming down for the second bar, the second measure, then stepping up in the third bar, the third measure, stepping down into the beginning of the fourth bar, the fourth measure, and then a bit of a leap. Now, does that help if we get the shape of that going? Let me play it again and see if you can turn that into notes. Here's the A minor chord and the two A's. 1, 2, 3. Pause if you want to. Okay, well, I wonder if we've kind of started to get to grips with this upper part then. So we said that it starts on A, well, we've got that. Then we said, well, it kind of climbs by step onto a B. Then it climbs by a step again onto a C. That's the end of that first bar, that first measure. Then it steps back. So it goes to a B, and that B fills up the whole of that second bar, that second measure. So 3 beats there. And then what happens after that? Well, we repeat the B at the beginning of the third bar, the third measure. Then we've got the same shape as the first bar, the first measure. So we're going up by step to C, up by step to D. So you see, it's the same as the first bar, the first measure, but everything's a note higher. And then, as before, it steps back, but this time only for 1 beat, only for that quarter note. And then there's a slight leap. And you might have heard that it goes back to the note that this whole thing started on, or the tonic of A, for 2 beats. And that is the end of your melody. So can you see what's going on there? Can you hear that? So we've got A, B, C, B, 2, 3. B, C, D, C, A. Okay, so that was the melody. Now, some of you may well have just been motoring on with that quite happily, and you're already working on the bass line. Other people haven't even thought about the bass line yet. That's fine, because we've been focusing on the upper part. So now we've got the upper part, and hopefully you've been able to notate that. Let's see if we can begin to attach a bass line to it. So one thing you can do now, it's often harder to hear a lower part, but if you've got the top part, well, you can do 2 things. You can listen to the bass line and think, what's happening? Same kind of process. What's repetition? What's going by step, up or down? Where are the leaps, big leaps, small leaps? You know, begin to get the shape of it in your mind. But you can also relate the bass sounds to what you're hearing upstairs. So you might think, oh, actually, I'm listening to a note up there that seems to be the same note down here, but maybe in a different octave. Or I'm hearing something that clashes a bit there. Oh, that's strange. Now, what would clash with that note? You know, or there's a note that fits really well with that note. Maybe sounds as if it belongs to the same chord or something. So that might just help you locate some of the bass notes. So now we're going to try and get your ear fixed on the bass line, the lower part. So the first note is this bottom A. And here's the A for the top part. Okay, I'm going to play the whole thing again. Again, pause at the end, have a little think about the bass, and then come back to me. 1, 2, 3. Okay, pause if you want to. Now, let's just go for another playing, because this is, for most people, probably the second time we've engaged with the bass line. Okay, there's A minor, here's the first note A, and that upper A as well. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I wonder how you're getting on with that. You may have heard things like the last note in the bass part was the same as the first note. It was also the same as the last note in the top part, but in a different octave. So that might be sort of quite useful. You probably heard that between the first note and the second note, there was a big leap. So then it's kind of decision time. Oh gosh, what is that leap? And some of you probably got it. Some of you may have got a big leap, but maybe not quite the right one. So if the first note's this, the second note's this. Now, what do we hear about that leap? It's an octave, isn't it? There's A downstairs followed by A upstairs. So A for 2 beats, going up an octave to A for 1 beat. You may also have heard in the last bar, the last measure, that the opposite was happening, that we started on the top A for 2 beats and then we came down to bottom A for 1 beat. So we're starting with A for 2 beats, going up to A for 1 beat, the very last bar, top A for 2 beats, coming down to bottom A for 1 beat. Now that's quite useful actually, because if you just got that, you've got half of it sorted, haven't you, in the bass. So listening out for those kind of intervals, octaves, quite handy if you can kind of think, I'm hearing the same note, just in a different octave. Okay, now I've given you that. Let's see if that helps you sort out the middle of what's happening in the bass line. Let's have another go. A minor, the bottom A, and the top A. 1, 2, 3. Okay, pause if you want to. Have a little think about that. If you've got that framework, the bookends of the first measure and the last measure, the first and the last bars, that should be useful. One thing you might have noticed, at the beginning of the second bar, the second measure, the bass note repeats. We start on this bottom A, we go up an octave to A, then we start the second bar, the second measure, with repeating the same A. The other thing you might have heard at the beginning of that second bar was that A in the bass clashes with the B in the upper part. So from the beginning, can you hear that clash? It's quite a strong clash, isn't it? So you're thinking, that kind of confirms on my own mind. I'm hearing B in the right hand, A in the left hand, as it were, or B in the treble clef and A in the bass clef. They're kind of clashing. They're a ninth apart. So you hear that dissonance. So that's quite useful in relating one part to the other, isn't it? So that's what's going on there. We're repeating that A across the bar line. Now, does that help us in any way? The A at the beginning of the second bar, the second measure, by the way, is for a crotchet, a quarter note. Because then you might have noticed, while the treble clef is just sitting there on the same B for 3 beats, the bass clef is kind of busy delivering some notes. Okay, let's have another go in the light of that. Here's A minor, A in the bass, A upstairs. 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, I wonder if we're making some headway with this. So we've talked about this leap in the bass up an octave, haven't we? And then we get a bar line, and then we said, oh, A repeats. Now then, it goes by step from that point to a G sharp. Now, you may have got G sharp, or you may have thought, oh, I've written G natural. Don't be too worried if you've written G naturals, then just thinking, is A to the next note a semitone or a tone? A to G is a tone, A to G sharp is a semitone. Then it goes down another step to F sharp. Now, G sharp to F sharp is a tone, so A, G sharp, F sharp. Then it steps up to G sharp there. You don't need to write the sharp sign because you've already had it earlier in the bar. So that's what's going on in the second bar, the second measure. Then we're going to go down a third to E. Now, you might have heard the rhythm as well. That E is actually a dotted crotchet, dotted quarter note. And then it goes up the scale, F sharp, just a quaver there, an eighth note. Up the scale again to G sharp for a quarter note, a crotchet, bar line, and then we're into the last bar. A for a minim, A for a crotchet, and that's the end of the show. Okay, so those are the two parts. So let's reveal the whole thing. If I press my magic button, see what happens. Oh, how about that? So we've now got the whole text, and hopefully you can now see how all of this actually fits together. I'll play it a couple of times. First time, listen to the upper part. Second time, try and tune into the bass part. Okay, so hopefully you can now really hear what's happening with the notes of the upper part and the notes of the lower part. Hopefully you can also kind of locate what's happening with the rhythm. You know, can you hear when notes are moving? Are they happening on beats, between beats? Are you hearing two notes inside one beat? You can also hear when things happen in terms of the combination of the two parts. So at the beginning, you know, we've got the first thing happening together. Then it's the upper part on its own, together, together, lower part, lower part, lower part, together, upper part, lower part, together, together, upper part, lower part. You know, when is it coming together? When is one part moving without the other? That helps you to align your rhythm. So if you found that easy, fantastic. Hopefully it's just been a bit of consolidation of something you could already do. If you found that really difficult, just take heart, that's fine. If you're not experienced in doing this stuff, it can take a while to kind of tool up with it. But it may be the start of a very meaningful journey for you in enabling you to hear these things and then being able to write them down. It will also make you a much better sight reader. You know, if you can look at a piece of music and think, actually, I can hear that, well, you'll be so much better at sight reading it. If you've enjoyed this video and now you're thinking, actually, I need to do more of this, then let me invite you to a place that's going to help you do that. Go to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. When you're on the homepage, click on courses and then find your way to the oral dictation course. That sounds very dry academic stuff. Actually, it's incredibly empowering for all musicians because it's a course full of this stuff. It starts with rhythms, so just kind of hearing rhythms. Can we write down rhythms properly? Can we do melodic stuff? We go on to 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, ever more increasingly complicated stuff. So that you go on this gradual journey of really learning to listen to something, being able to write it down. So next time you have a musical idea, you can think, yep, I can have a good crack at writing this down. Possibly with the help of an instrument, but possibly without a help of an instrument, which would be great. And then also you're going to help yourself with the sight reading skills, being able to look at something thinking, yep, I know what that sounds like. So I think this is a really liberating thing for musicians to do. That's the oral dictation course. Lots of other stuff on the website as well, so have a good route around while you're there. www.mmcourses.co.uk.